I guess we are now official then. My name is Heather Riggs. I'm Director of Administration here at the New England Museum Association. And I just want to welcome everybody into our session today. I'm going to keep my introductions very brief because I want to turn it over to Meredith and Debbie Disston to talk about themselves a little bit, the PAG, and all of the wonderful things that they're doing, and we could get going. So Meredith, I think I'm handing it over to you first.
Great. Welcome, everybody. So as Heather said, I'm Meredith Fluke. I'm the director of the Cantor Art Gallery at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. I'm here right now. I'm the co-chair along with Debbie Disston of the Academic Museums and Galleries PAG. I will hand the reins over to Debbie in just a second, but I'm glad to see everyone writing their names into the chat. We will be using the chat a bit today to sort of as an auxiliary way of interacting with one another as we do on Zoom. I think we're pretty familiar with Zoom at this point. I'm going to just talk briefly about the topic that we're discussing today, which is measuring engagement in academic museums and galleries, and talk a little bit about my experience over the past year and a half with the topic. In truth, the program idea generates from Debbie Disston, who has been thinking a lot about engagement this year. And we thought that as many of us are sitting down to write our annual reports for our boards, for our administrative bodies, we're all faced with the issue of how to assess and represent really engagement with our programs and collections. So many of us have been asked, I think, this year to think about how our sense of engagement has shifted this past year, and to also write goals that reflect our lessons learned through the pandemic, as well as the sort of critical social and political national upheaval that we've been through. Some of us over the past year have been asked to justify our value within our institutional landscape, especially as larger priorities might be shifting while resources are tightening. So I think that we've all had probably a different experience of the moment based on a number of factors, on the foundations that have been laid for us in the past, the position and health of our academic institutions, the capacity of our museums and galleries to engage with a number of these issues. And this is just a few ways that we might have different experiences. And we thought it would be great to come together and really talk about those experiences as a group. I'm going to just talk about my own experience, and Debbie will address hers as well. I became the director of the Cantor Art Gallery in the fall of 2019. So I had about 4 months on campus before we closed down for the pandemic. So not a lot of time to really assess the situation before I was sort of isolated in my office. I walked into a situation on campus where the gallery had a long time and much beloved director who maintained a really active rotation exhibition schedule of about 4 to 6 temporary exhibitions a year. So most of those were contemporary artists and some historical shows. At the Cantor, we have only 2 full-time staff members, and we rely heavily on contractual work as well as college resources for labor. So things like fundraising, promotion, virtual programs, all of that, we sort of have to ask for help from our colleagues at Holy Cross. And historically, the gallery has functioned most regularly to support faculty curatorial initiatives. So the work of engagement has really occurred at the level of the course, and the initiating faculty has been charged with integrating the material into the curriculum through their colleagues and through their department. We've worked really closely with studio faculty on at least half of our exhibitions that we have put up. So the Cantor Gallery is moving into a new building in the fall of 2022, which will be a large art center with dance, theater, music, all in the same building. This will be a more public-facing gallery, and that is a factor that requires a shift in goals and requires greater resources for us. Although the administration of the college has not asked me to really justify my program or to codify academic, curricular, co-curricular engagement at this point, I am aware of the fact that it's only a matter of time, and especially with a new building, with a new, more ambitious program, that will be an enormous draw on the college's resources, or at least will certainly be perceived to be an enormous draw on the college's resources. Due to the pandemic, I've been shielded from a lot of that inevitable criticism from faculty and alumni especially. But I can only assume that the reality will hit when everyone gets back to campus in the fall and they see this massive building that was sort of built over the course of the past year and a half while they were gone. And I think that this will engender more acute conversations about the importance of and role of the gallery and the arts on campus. So I am interested in staying ahead of the ball, and I'm really grateful to Debbie, who has been thinking about engagement, and has been a great resource to me about thinking about what work can I do in advance? How can I think generatively about engagement before being asked to justify the work that I'm doing? So Debbie, I'm going to turn it over to you as our wonderful resource. And in the meantime, I'm going to paste some questions into the chat that are for people to consider while Debbie is talking.
Okay, thanks, Meredith. That was a really interesting introduction of what you do. I always appreciate hearing what you share. So my name's Debbie Disston, and I'm the director of the Makinich Art Gallery at Southern New Hampshire University, which is in Manchester, New Hampshire. And we were closed for the entire academic year. So every employee worked remotely. And in addition to that daunting task of how to, air quotes, pivot and provide that all the work that we do in a virtual context, we also were required to go through a process that the university called the transformation. So if you're not familiar with SNHU, they have a very, very robust online degree conferring program. And then we have a traditional on-campus face-to-face classes, a traditional undergraduate experience with about 3,000 students. In the online degree programs, we have about 135,000 students that are enrolled. So we are technically the largest university in the country in terms of the number of students that we are serving in a degree program. Over this past year, the transformation project has required, so the intention, the mission of the university and the goal of SNHU is to create a business model that will be providing an accessible academic program financially that would allow people who are otherwise not able to participate in a higher education degree program to attend college. So in order to accomplish that, there are various ways in which the university has gone about reorganizing. And one of those ways of reorganizing is to create a hybrid of the two schools that they have been very successful at managing. So we will be producing degree programs that will combine online courses with face-to-face courses and hybrid versions of that. And there's a whole lot of other details that go into that I won't go into right now. I'm always happy to share them with anyone that would like to have a conversation about it. But what it meant was that the university, they declared this a transformation, so that the entire university is going through a major reorganization of what their business model is. And in order to do that, they had to do an intense dive in a review of what each department, division, whatever you want to call it, went through. So my gallery was one of those groups. And what we had to do for the last year is to participate in a very rigorous review process of every single little detail that you can imagine of what we do. And engagement was a very important part of that conversation. So the way Southern New Hampshire University asks a question about engagement is and one of the ways in which they ask this question is, where is the student voice represented in the work that you do? So, and this is an important question to consider for all of us, because I think what I have discovered in my exploration of this with other colleagues is the student voice is not considered in many different areas. I want to back up a little bit and also make the point that engagement is not assessment. Assessment is a system where you have a rubric that defines clear goals and objectives, and then at the end of a scheduled period of time, you determine whether you have reached those goals. And that's not what engagement is. Engagement, and I want to say also that we do not have a clear definition of what engagement is within the context of academic museums and galleries. And that's why we want to have this conversation, to see what people think it is. In my job, what I have to do is analyze where the student voice is in the work that we do. And what that could look like is, that's not writing, by the way, that's not anecdotal work. That's not writing papers about an exhibition. It's about, how do students actually become involved as stakeholders in the work that we do. So one way in which that would look is having what we'll be doing is we'll be forming a standing committee that will include students, some faculty, and perhaps some staff from different parts of the university that can meet on a regular basis and form discussions about where they think the agency of art is in our community. Another way we can have student engagement is to delegate all of the work. This is another thing we're going to do in terms of engagement. We will be delegating all of the online resources we have created for the past year, which have been virtual exhibitions, YouTube videos for slow looking workshops, webinars, podcasts, and we are going to be delegating all of that to the student workers. And by doing so, they become stakeholders in the way that we produce the message and we market the work that we do. So the reason why this is important to Southern New Hampshire University is because, as I said, their mission is to reduce the cost of higher education, so the experience of higher education is more accessible and affordable for people who would otherwise not be able to achieve this. And part of their analysis of cost efficiency is to have the experience, in addition to student workers, have the experience of perhaps being an intern, where you're an intern in the project of the gallery or the museum, and you're simultaneously getting paid for it. There's that's and you're receiving credit for that experience. So there's an exchange, a monetary exchange for the credit, but it's not as expensive as taking a 3-4 credit class. So we do not have the answers by any means of what engagement is. I was telling Meredith that I would be reluctant to share all of the deep diving that we did with the questions that were asked of us, because at the end of the day, what part of the result of this whole year was determining that we don't have the answers to what it is, and it will take the next couple of years to actually develop the model that SNHU is creating. So we're still in an exploratory phase, and I think that's all I want to say on my end, that this, as Meredith pointed out, this has been a prescient topic for me because it's required of me to ask these questions. And I have reached out to colleagues across across the country and even the world through vehicles such as AAM to pose a question. What is engagement in your institution? How do you define that? And so that's why we're here, to ask you the question. If it's an important question for you, if it's something that's been directed to you by your supervisor or by senior leadership of your organization, or if it's just a personal topic that you're interested in, we'd like to have a conversation about that. So this is open conversation. We are not going to break down into little groups or anything. So I see Carrie has a hand up.
Debbie, I have a question. I didn't quite understand what you were saying in terms of next steps that you were looking to do when you said that you were delegating to your students the digital assets that you'd created over the last year on your YouTube channel. You were delegating them to your students. Could you explain that further?
Yeah, so what we did this year was we invited the students. We usually have 11 students that work for us each year, and we invited those who wanted to work remotely to let us know. So we had 4 students that wanted to work remotely. And what we had them do was they did a social media takeover. So they were responsible for our daily social media postings. We took charge of the Kunstmatrix virtual exhibition platform, but moving forward, we're currently training one student in particular who's a senior graphic design major to do what my assistant was doing. We will also have them organize topics for webinars and podcasts and be responsible for those. So the reason why we're doing that, well, why we're delegating the work that, so let me back up. So we've made the decision that we're going to deliver both online resources and face-to-face work. We can't possibly manage, my assistant and I can't possibly manage that on our own. So we have to empower our students to take charge of this. And because of what we've experienced this year and the success that we've had, it was very clear that this was something that would be very, very important to have our students experience. So that also might take the form of, let's say, a marketing communication class would like to have their students do half of their semester in the spring, be responsible for the marketing of the gallery. And we could have this exchange of credit and pay for the service of that class. We're not going to do that this first academic year because we're not ready to take that on. The entire university isn't really ready to take that on, but that's an example of the model that we're looking at. So yeah, it's like dividing and conquering.
Okay, I get it. So you're going to have them just start doing the work that you were doing in the digital realm. So my other question is, so when you're talking about measuring engagement, you in this context, you're really talking about measuring student engagement. Is that correct?
Yes, right now we're talking about student engagement because that's where the thrust of the concern is for the university. It's very important for the university to create this model where the students are the stakeholders, and they are, it is a topic that many institutions really dislike because it has too much of a business tone to it. But I think in reality, that is what the case is. we have more and more families that want proof that their students are going to have jobs when they get out of school. We have the struggle of the humanities having less gravitas in them than the evidence that these young people can be employed. So that's the stance that our university is taking, as they want to do everything they can to consider, how do you have the students engaged in the experience of learning so that they are invested in that content. That's what they're looking at. How do you get these students so invested in the content that they really make the relationship between what they're learning and what they will do when they leave their 4 years or whatever of education? So that's why they ask the question, where is the student voice in your work?
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, the student voice isn't writing a paper about your experience, because the reason is because that's a mandate. They're being told to go and write a paper. That's not engagement. That's a directive. That's that's something they have to do to receive a point or a grade. So it's an interesting situation, because we have to ask, well, what is engagement? And I'm totally open to the discussion, because it's going to be my responsibility to deliver the message to the people I work for, that this is our experience of what engagement is.
Debbie, can I ask a question about your standing committee? Because, something you mentioned was the student voice. And I think something we all think about is that, how student voices can be reflected in future programs. And especially thinking about the sort of coalescence of student voice with curatorial work, with say, curatorial program and exhibitions, because, a lot of us put up exhibitions and we sort of hope, based on our past experience, that this is going to engage, or we, are relying on our faculty colleagues to do, some of that work. And so I was wondering how you're going to utilize what you're thinking about for that standing committee, and, how they will be asked to weigh in on programs. You said something about how they would be thinking about the world of arts on college, but, is there a sort of a more specific way that they'll be used there?
Right. So when I started having these conversations with different colleagues, many people were just aghast at, oh my God, you mean they want the students to curate the exhibits and to be the art historians? And it was laughable to some people. And I said, no, that's not what it's about. It's clear that we hold the expertise of understanding the breadth and depth of considering how you go about making selections of topics, how you curate exhibits, how you organize and plan, how you fund these things. So part of it is teaching the standing committee what the work is about, right? That has to come first, so that so they can understand the scope within which you have to consider topics. And then the next step is to consider the topics that are important to that population. It's not very different from a standing museum in a community that has to consider their population and be responsible for reflecting the interests and needs of that community. So if contemporary culture is of interest to them, and they feel strongly about representing gender identity or BIPOC issues, or anything with systemic racism. I mean, these are the topics of the day right now. But I think so engaged. I looked up the definition in the Webster about engagement. It's the coming together in one place of people, an agreement to come together. So when we come together, we're ideally, you want to welcome one another's points of views, right? So a standing committee is an opportunity for people to share their experience and their observation of the world around them and their experience, particularly of being students, and what they feel would be important topics to share through the lens of art. And then the partnership would be our expertise of who and what we know in the cultural realm, and guiding them to say, okay, if this is the kind of thing that you'd like to address, I would recommend that we look at this. And then you can build upon that. So it's a two-way street. We're informing one another about what we know, what our experiences are, and how we can work together. So does anybody else have questions or experiences that they'd like to share from their own business, their own organization?
And I think, some of the questions are in the chat that Debbie and I had talked about before we got to today. And I'm interested in this question of, have you been asked by your supervisor or your institution, to somehow talk about engagement or somehow account for the levels of engagement, beyond numbers and anecdotes? Are there ways in which you've structured those reports or those responses that could be helpful for the rest of us to hear? How do you go about explaining those things? Hi, Erin.
Hi, so I'm at the Culinary Arts Museum at Johnson & Wales, and the museum is a staff member of one, myself, and our student employees and work study students. The museum is also part of the library. So when it comes to questions of engagement, they're coming through the lens of what a librarian would expect. And librarians, from my experience, are very into measuring engagement and all other measurable factors. So I've tried to move in a direction where I could try and get solid numbers on something, but of course that was almost impossible over the past year and a half. So I've continued with my trend of being able to showcase as many connections as I'm making throughout the institution. So I'm working with a design class from the College of Design and Engineering and Design, and they're helping me take content that I've curated, and they're doing the design, they're doing the graphics for it as part of their classwork. So again, maybe that's not, maybe that's mandated, I guess, but it's a creative, real world working engagement that I've done in the past. And of course, during COVID, it was a very safe environment for the students to be able to work within their own institution. I've also done projects with those classes that bring in culinary students, so that we'll have 3 different departments working together on exhibit content. We don't do external facing exhibits anymore. We don't do, the big story based exhibitry. It's almost all curriculum based. So I can make very clear connections to, this is the course number that this exhibit is supporting, and these are the students that are, taking advantage of it. So, and as much as I just try and function as a hub on campus and try and highlight those connections, I also have my student assistants helping me add to existing exhibits. So there'll be one student who did a whole cataloging project this past term on a travel collection, is adding to our Food on the Move exhibit. So he will have his own little showcase section that one of our graphic design students, who's also working here, was a work study this summer as an essay, is helping to do the graphic design on. So those may be intensive engagement moments, but I take whatever I can get and I highlight it as best I can.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm not going for pure numbers. I'm going for celebratory moments.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Again, there is no answer to what this is. This is a conversation to understand how people are looking at it. So we have a bunch of people that are just have their names up and no faces. Do you want to make yourself known or say something or? Hi, Chloe.
I can jump in quickly. Hi, I'm Chloe Zog. I work at the Mass Art Museum, and we are at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. So we consider ourselves a teaching museum for the Art and Design College, and we're a contemporary art museum. We've been asking ourselves a lot. We renovated and opened in February 2020. And throughout the whole process, asked ourselves, what does it mean to be a resource to the college? We spent a lot of time going to all of the department chairs and saying, you know, how would you see us as a resource? That's a question we're still figuring out because of COVID. But one way that we can measure engagement or have is we pay all of our students, interns, fellows, anybody who works for us. And so the number of dollars we spent translates into a number of hours the students have spent working for us. So again, that goes back to numbers, but sometimes that does translate. If we can say that our student employees have spent X number of hours working with museum staff and training and projects, and then we detail out what those are, it tends to help with the administration to understand, you know, what their time looks like. And another thing is with faculty, this goes back to the mandated, but we do try to track all of that because if we can enrich curriculum and be a resource in their teaching, it counts for a lot in terms of the college's perspective. We have the benefit that it's a direct connection at an art and design college to an art museum. So I know it can be difficult if those connections aren't always there.
Mm-hmm.
And also all of our museum attendants are students. So we cannot exist or operate without them. When we are not in COVID times, we have a very intensive training process that involves them evaluating their experience as well. So we try to get information from there. But I do agree that engagement is really hard to measure, especially in this past year. You know, showing up at virtual events is really hard to measure. We've been dealing with attendance numbers where if there, I know there's 2 or 3 people at one click, you know, how do we gather that? I don't know, but those are just some ideas.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, because that is very important to demonstrate that you are critically employing people and making that a valuable experience. That's definitely very, very important. Has anybody used data analytics to check out engagement? For instance, I know, I'm sure some of you are aware of an organization called QZM, and they have an app. They have designed an app that is about measuring and about engagement, but not measuring in terms of numbers, asking more provocative questions about what the experience is. So has anybody tried anything that isn't about collecting numbers, but getting perhaps a more solid description of what a student or a visitor is going to walk away with their experience of your exhibitions or programs?
I don't think we've been all that skillful at it, but we have tried. I'm Mike, and I'm from the Mary Baker Eddy Library in Boston, which is not an academic museum or gallery, but we work with students and scholars pretty extensively. So I'm trying to kind of translate some of what is being said into our needs. And I apologize for being a little late. I was just going to very briefly say that one way we've tried to get more qualitative information has been to add surveys to, we service a number of people who send us questions. And so when we respond to their question, we ask them not just to respond to the quality of our service, but also maybe we ask several other questions to try and gather information about the nature of their engagement, why they came to us. I don't think we're all that great at it. we'd like to do better.
Yeah, no, I think that's great because I've heard that a lot from people of using the surveys post, especially with all of the online services that we've had to do in the past year. Many people have really realized some benefits from those types of surveys. So that's a really, really good point to share that with people. I know there's all sorts of different platforms that you can attach to Zoom and other webinar resources to allow you to do those surveys. Any other ideas that people would like to share? Those of you who don't have your face up or just want to speak up?
I just want to add a question on top of that. So Chloe, I didn't mean to interrupt you. The question I have, if anyone has worked successfully with their academic institution on these issues of, is there an office of engagement? Is there an office of assessment that, somehow you could, I've been thinking about, are there people, because I'm just two people, and that is, writing a survey is super difficult to be effective, as has been pointed out. So has anyone successfully or seen a good successful collaboration between this department that we all have on campus and the museum or gallery to figure out ways of getting information out of visitors? I would love to hear about it. Chloe.
I'll speak up again. To answer your question, Meredith, we do have an Office of Institutional Research that the last, 2 years or so has really done a lot of really amazing work. And so one of our projects, because of Zoom, is now when we have registration for events, we can ask, are you a student? Are you this or that? And they're going to help us over the summer, hopefully. I guess that's now. Look at all of the data we've collected and do that. So we do. And the really great thing about them, if any of you have, I feel like most colleges and universities absolutely have people doing institutional research, and they get really excited about this as well because they have all kinds of metrics that I wasn't even aware of, and they could do sort of cross referencing of data. So I would highly recommend reaching out and finding out who does this at your institution. So that's something I'm really excited about. And I had another thought about measuring engagement quickly. Was we try really hard to keep in touch with our alums, at the very least following them on social media, because a way of measuring engagement is following their path. So even if they're, let's say, we work in an art museum and then I become an art historian, or I work in an art museum or whatever, that's a very direct path, but there are lots of other success stories that we can tell through keeping in touch with our alums. And I think that the college really likes to hear about those stories. It's a lot of work for us as individuals to maintain these relationships. That said, I do think it really helps with that successful engagement story. My time as a student employee led to this future is really beneficial for the administration to hear.
Mm-hmm. I see someone, Francesca, you have made yourself known. Is there something you'd like to
Hi,
share?
sorry, I'm new. I've never attended one of your meetings, and I was a little confused about what my role might be. I'm actually a research curator at the Harvard Art Museums in the Division of Academic and Public Programs. So I don't know, in terms of engagement, and maybe some of my other colleagues can speak more to it. Are we talking about the student engagement, the visitor engagement? Where it sounded like there was a lot of focus on trying to gauge or to, A, engage the students, and B, then assess that, if I've got it correctly. And I know we have at the Harvard Art Museums, we have a student board, we have student guides. They've been very active during the pandemic time with, guided tour, virtual tours, and have done really incredibly sort of inventive things, especially since they're all technologically inclined, and been very excited about
Those are
sharing their
beautiful.
knowledge with the
Yeah,
folks out there. So
those are perfect examples of engagement, Francesca.
Yeah.
Yes, we are speaking specifically about students in this conversation, but I think that it's whatever we explore, discuss about student engagement is totally relevant to other visitors. Yeah, I think that a student board is great. Having getting students involved in developing and creating didactic material for exhibitions. I know Dartmouth, the Hood Museum, is really, really good at that. They employ that quite a bit in all of their exhibits. Yeah, so those are definitely great examples. Thank you for sharing that.
And we haven't so much since we reopened, but I've been here for a while. We did have exhibitions that were curated. I don't know, depends on the level, but students have been involved in, graduate students in curating exhibitions in the past and have been incredibly excited about that. So, maybe it's difficult to do in person, but virtually maybe, I don't know. There's so many ways, as you're saying, giving them the experience of applying some of what they might do with all that they're learning in the real world when they go out there.
Well, it's also a form of respect, to respect an individual that they are capable of rising to the occasion and making a significant contribution to the work that you do. I think that's a powerful model to build and create so that we have strong and successful students that leave our institutions.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I don't know, but we're community, well, we're an academic art museum, but with other big museums around us. And so there's this constant tension of, what can we do well versus what we should be doing, and this whole question of who our communities are and doing a good job in all different realms is something that we're trying to tackle, especially, in following Black Lives Matter and all of the societal issues that are really, that we need to confront. And I'm just wondering whether the students might also be certainly my intern this past year was incredibly excited at the prospect of being part of the process of reaching out to potential community partners and, engaging with them. And she's a graduate student in the Graduate School of Education, so she has that, pedagogical training. But I don't know, these are all just little thoughts I thought.
Those are great examples. Thank you. Really valuable examples. Does anybody else have something they'd like to share?
Christina has her hand up.
Christina's been hand up for a while.
Oh, Christina, I'm sorry, the little yellow hand next to please go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, no, thanks. I just wanted to give a response to Meredith's question about, collaboration with other areas and departments in the university, because I think that's kind of what I represent. And it's great to see some of my Harvard colleagues from the art museums here. So I am a researcher and instructor in the Graduate School of Education and also in the Museum Studies program. And so I teach courses around, audience research, evaluation, qualitative research methods, things like that. And one of the things that I tend to do in my courses is have students go into the museums. When we were on campus, we were doing it physically, and we've done it fully online as well, to conduct studies, whether that's with students who are engaged with the museum, or more often it's more general visitors. And so I would recommend reaching out to like the education school or department. And I know not a lot of colleges and universities necessarily have a museology or museum studies program, but that could be something to look at as well. But education and even psychology, sociology programs as well, a lot of those have social science research methods courses and are looking for opportunities for those students to get some hands-on experience while they're being trained in how to do surveys and conduct interviews and do focus groups and things like that. So just some other ideas. And some of my colleagues and I are actually doing a conference session at the Visitor Studies Association online conference next month on this topic. It's collaborating between university departments and museums to kind of build capacity on both sides.
No, that's great. This is something that Meredith and I discussed as we were preparing this, was the collaboration. And in our university, they call it interoperability. I think part of the struggle for many organizations is the silo effect in departments. And when departments choose to operate independently of one another, not only does it create barriers to accomplishing these types of goals, but it also is a very expensive way to run a business. Because what happens is there's an iteration of processes where if you combine departments together, you remove that iteration, and it also environmentally, if you're doubling the work of something, you're also using more energy, more environmental expense is made. So there's a lot of benefit to have this collaboration between departments. And I'm really glad that you brought that up. It's not easy to do in many institutions because of the way people have done business for a long time. They're resistant. I do think that looking at what barriers might be in the way of understanding engagement is an important thing to look at. And something like what I just mentioned, the silo effect that happens in departments can be one of those barriers. Capacity is a barrier, not having enough staff to be able to actually measure things or observe or even participate in events where you can be a witness to, you can ask questions, you can conduct surveys after your webinars, et cetera. That's a problem also. We're getting close to the end of our hour, but we have 10 minutes and I'd love to hear from more people who are, I see the names and not the faces.
So I just want to point out in the chat, Jen has posted some things that her and Christina worked on, which were, it sounds like a pretty fulsome collaboration between curators, educators, and faculty. So just to take a look at that, and I don't know, Jen, if you just want to talk a little bit about what that process looked like, it might be helpful to even hear. I think we all struggle with how to collaborate outside of the people we're used to collaborating with. I know that I do that, I sort of, you find the people that you work really well with and you end up doing projects over and over again, and capacity is really important here, because I'm just one person, and so how many collaborations can I really do well is always a question I have to ask myself. But I think this is a really good example of of ways in which you triangulate it across all of these different places to provide a really extensive experience for students.
Sure, I'll jump in, although I don't know too much about these. So I just was, when Francesca was speaking, I dropped some of these in the chat to reinforce what she was saying. So I'm fully on the side. So my collaborations are all with faculty teaching interdisciplinary classes. But the project that I linked to here is an example of, Francesca mentioned we used to have students working on exhibitions. We do still have graduate students who work as interns and they work on exhibitions, but this is a very recent example of trying to engage students with reframing a part of our collections online. So it's a digital tool, which is, we have like a native tool builder in our website that anyone can use. And students use it a lot actually for classes, for class projects. So there's more where this came from, but this was spearheaded by a curator. So I can't really speak to her process, but I know that she recruited students who had an interest in this particular part of our collection, which are the reliefs that were taken from Qianlongshan and are sort of dissociated from their landscape context in our gallery. And so they each, as far as I understand, worked on a different part, a different sort of like research angle, and then they made the tool together. So that's what that is, but I can't really speak to how she, like what the mechanics of that really were. I just have the end product. And yeah, then what I said about Christina's students, that I was slightly involved in that collaboration, but maybe Christina could speak better to that. The class that she and Lynn Baum taught together about assessment, she mentioned they always work on projects with us. We were developing right before COVID an audio guide actually using the QZM app, and they field tested with visitors in our galleries for their final project some of the audio files, and we came up with the questions that we wanted to have answered, and they took it from there. So that was really nice, because also we can show up the work of students, and they have a very important role in shaping the visitor experience for everybody else. That's all I got. Thank you for prompting me, Meredith.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that you use the QZM app. It's something I'm looking into for our own institution as well. A little expensive, but it's.
I was just going to say,
into it.
I have to say, I'm not sure that we will go back to it after testing things with them because it's so expensive. And actually, one of the alternatives is that we may want to use our digital tool builder and put the audio guide in there. The way it looks right now, it's very like on a cell phone, which it was actually designed for. It's actually not as user-friendly as you think, especially for navigating from place to place. And now we have other considerations about how we'll get from point A to point B in an age of COVID with social distancing and everything. So, and we are also closed still. So not sure how that's going to get tested anyway.
Right. Carrie, you have a question.
Well, no, I'll just share that we've used QZM for, I think, 6 years. We were very early adopter, and we're just giving it up and just going to SoundCloud, where my staff loathe it.
Love it.
So yeah, just for
and then there's also the idea of partnering if you have, so for instance, we have a game design department at our university, which is part of the marketing communications group. And they're totally capable of creating apps that do these types of things. So so it's this kind of thinking of collaboration that is also about where is your student voice? They become the stakeholders in developing these resources, and then it becomes like doubly powerful, because not only have you produced a product, but you use students to create that product, right? So that's what our university is looking at. Meredith, I'm just going to throw out this question before we close, and we'll leave room for anybody else that wants to say anything. Do you think that this is a subject that you would like to see at the NEMA conference, or as a broader topic, where a panel of people could explore this and we could really get into some more meat of it? I mean, the people from Harvard have great examples to share, and you all have such wonderful examples. Would you be interested in taking a deeper dive into this subject? You can raise your hand.
Yes. However, we are actually making a new hire for someone who will be in charge of campus partnership. That person will probably end up being the right person to more
yeah.
Because they will have a vision for, I hope for things we haven't thought of at all. So but it would be to listen to that conversation for sure.
Right. Well, I know I would love to do that, because I know it will be incumbent upon me to execute some demonstrate examples of ways in which we are engaging the students. And would anybody—
Well, I just thank Harvard, because I can't remember, it might even have been someone on this call, but some people at Harvard gave us the great idea for you do something, I can't remember what you call them, but we now call them exhibition previews. I think you call them faculty forums maybe. And we do that now. And I was going to mention it actually in terms of student engagement, because we've started including students in those previews. So the semester before an exhibition, we invite faculty who we think will be interested, using our faculty liaisons for that exhibition to determine which faculty to invite. We invite students based on usually student clubs. So for instance, we have 3 fall exhibitions that relate to like Black Lives Matter type issues. So we're inviting the Black Student Union and other, clubs that relate to that. And then staff, anyone we think might be interested, but faculty who we want to make sure these exhibitions and events get on their syllabi. And we do it semester before. So anyway, a way to build student engagement through letting them know about the exhibition and programs the semester before, so they can drum up interest. Thank you, Harvard.
Thank you, because now I'm going to go back to my colleagues and say, we do this with in other ways, but this is very smart. Thank you.
So I just put my email address in. If you'd like to, if you're interested in creating a panel discussion for who knows what, a NEMA conference, an independent thing that we do, or for AAMG or for whatever, I think that this is a really, really important topic to explore, and you all have such great ideas. And I'd love to sort of dig deeper. So let's continue the conversation down the road. Meredith, do you want to add anything to this before we close? Because it's 12 now.
No, thank you. I think, it would be great at some point to start thinking about sort of gathering resources together. I would love, Christina to talk more about how, she works with students to do assessment. These are things that are not accessible, like I do not have at my college, but, could I do some type of thing like that? I think that's, to have sort of tangible resources available to people on how we're doing these projects.
That's great. Yeah. Well, Heather, is there anything you would like to add in closing?
Just saying thank you, and building off what Debbie said is that our annual conference call for proposals is due June 11th. So make sure to check out the website. I know our PAG program does have some special wiggle room on certain topics, especially with their PAG lunch. So if we don't make this deadline, we could definitely try something for the PAG lunch as well.
Great.
But I want to say thanks to both of you for sharing your knowledge and everybody else for contributing as well. So I hope to see you all at another NEMA program. And I think that's it for today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
For contributing. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.